Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports. It's Colonel Chris Wyatt here, live in central Pennsylvania with a special guest today. None other than a guest I recently had on my trip to South Africa just, not even 2 weeks ago. Former President of Botswana, Ian Khama. Sir, Otsihili, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, and I hope you are too.
I'm doing okay, although I have to admit that I need to become one of these rich caterers or somebody with a lot of money like Bill Gates so I can have my own private jet. My flight back from Cape Town on a Delta, the gentleman in front of me thought he was on a cruise liner and lowered his seat for 15 and a half hours. And my back, I can't move now for a week. I've wrenched something. 58 years old, never had a back injury, and I'm in a lot of pain. But other than that, I'm doing well. Hey, sir, so I reached out to your staff to talk to you about this big issue here that you and I touched on briefly when we spoke in person on the 28th, and that's about the poaching and conservation in Botswana. The Voice of America did a report this week coming out, and that's why I reached out to you, talking about just how devastating it's been. They say that 138 rhinos have been poached and 76 have died of natural causes in the last 5 years. That's a shocking number, given that Botswana had roughly 400 rhinos when you left office. Is this an accurate report about what's actually going on with the rhinos in Botswana?
Well, actually, it's a very sad story. If I can give you a little bit of a background. This whole story of our rhinos, for me, started in the mid-1990s. When I was in the army, and I was told that a rhino carcass had been found, and could the military please go in and investigate and see if it would be able to capture any of the poachers. So we sent a small detachment up there to go and see what happened. And whilst they were there, they discovered actually there was quite a lot more indications of poaching. And so from a small detachment of about 20, at the height of our anti-poaching operations, we deployed about 1,000 troops in the field to conduct anti-poaching. And we were able to stabilize the situation in the country, whereby our photographic tourism grew very significantly, and we had managed to subdue, to a great extent, a lot of the poaching. So when I came into office, we didn't really have hardly any rhinos in the wild. They were all in sanctuaries. And in our wish to improve the tourism product, we then started a process of importing or relocating rhinos from neighboring countries and from our own sanctuaries into the wild. And it was a very successful operation, even though it was very expensive, needed a lot of resources in terms of manpower and equipment and finances, but we managed, and it went extremely well, and we had a good number of our troops still deployed. I ensured that all the security services were employed around the country, which we divided into areas of responsibility for them in order to have better coordination. So then I think during the 10 years I was in office, we lost 2 rhinos, one in a private sanctuary and the other one in the wild. And both people responsible for that were caught. When I left office, you suddenly found there was an onslaught. You can imagine we had the same number of people deployed in the field when I was there as when I left. But suddenly there was this upsurge of poaching. And what happened was, about a month or 2 after I left office, Masisi, the current president, disarmed the anti-poaching unit of the wildlife department. Can you imagine that? Disarming, the anti-poaching unit. What would you expect would happen? The head of the anti-poaching unit, who was appointed during my term in office, was removed. The head of the wildlife department, the overall boss of our game parks and everything, he also mysteriously died. So we just saw an onslaught on our poachers and on our rhinos in the last few years, and it hasn't only been rhinos; it's even elephants and other general game. we had a ban on hunting in the country. He lifted the ban. And so you've just seen that the product that we had in Botswana was suddenly eroded. And you would ask yourself, well, what could have led to it? You know, in all honesty, at best, I would say it was total incompetence and negligence that led to this poaching. And at worst, it was corruption and complicity. And in fact, I would lump them together and say both were responsible. There's no way, with the small population we had of rhinos, and I say small in comparison to countries like South Africa, you can lose 76 rhinos from natural causes. It just doesn't happen.
It doesn't make
sense. They say some of them, they said some of them died when they were trying to relocate them. I mean, they were relocating rhinos from the wild back into sanctuaries when we had succeeded in relocating them in the other direction from sanctuaries into the wild. And suddenly because of the incompetence of the operation to relocate them, a lot of the rhinos died through mishandling. But these others, this number of 76, I can just tell you, it's impossible. It's impossible for so many rhinos to have died. And that's why I say the complicity and the corruption comes into it.
Well, sir, you mentioned that, but you're obviously not alone in that assessment. Ives, a conservationist, said that, this is quoted in the Voice of America, we have natural causes that can occur. For example, fights between bulls. Sometimes bulls will kill calves. Hyenas can kill calves. Lions catch calves. And fire can kill animals. But at most, we lose 2 or 3 a year. We do not lose 76 animals in 3 or 4 years, is what Ives said, which jives with what you're saying.
And you know, and the other thing they tried to do was to dehorn the rhinos.
Yes.
And we told them that that is a waste of time, because when you dehorn the rhino, you can't, of course, go right down to the base. You know, you have to leave a little stub so that you don't have a wound.
And they'll kill them for the stub. They'll still kill them for the stub, won't they?
They still kill them. And we lost rhinos which had been dehorned. And you can imagine the horn grows back. And whatever size it reaches as it's in the process of growing is valuable to the poachers and their syndicates. So what is the point? And what it meant was that they were going to have to constantly dart these poor rhinos in order to cut their horns. And through the lifespan of a rhino, the poor animal would be darted, having its horn cut all the time to try to achieve a situation whereby poachers would not be interested. But like I said, the poachers were interested even in the stub. So it was a totally failed operation. It was a disaster. And everything we worked for over those years has just been reversed.
It's quite sad. I mean, you know, as you mentioned, not only is an important effort of conservation, but it was costly. It took a lot of money to bring these animals in. And actually, it seems to me like a wise program. You get genetic diversity, bringing excess animals who are under threat from other countries in a country that had a very successful, arguably the most successful anti-poaching operations in Africa, although over periods of time, the Kenyans have been very successful, but they're constantly under threat. So I would have to argue, given what's happened in Kenya, that the Botswana and the BDF program, the wildlife program, was the most successful anti-poaching operation in Africa. And to see it just, I don't know, dismantled or become so ineffective, it makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, it's crazy. And you don't have a lot of animals to begin with. So now that I think it's a fair statement to say that Botswana's rhino population has been decimated in the last 5 years. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. In fact, at the time I spoke about in the mid-90s, when that one rhino was poached, we decided to try and gather up all the remaining rhinos in Botswana for their protection. And you know how many we found? We found 5 or 6 only.
Wow.
Only 5 or 6 rhinos remained. They were almost extinct in our country. And one of the rhinos, which was found, one of the last ones, was full of bullet holes. And unfortunately, it succumbed to its injuries a couple of weeks later. But we managed to build that number of 5 to the several hundred that you've spoken about. And in South Africa, you would know, especially in the Kruger National Park, they were losing at one stage around that time up to 1,000 rhinos a year being poached. And a lot of the people here who have private parks in South Africa were even saying Botswana is a safe haven for rhinos, and were very happy to relocate their rhinos for safekeeping in our country. That has now been turned on its head, and now we are just like anywhere else where you just see this onslaught. And because there's a total indifference to wildlife, there's a total indifference to conservation, and they just don't care about the nature, about biodiversity, and everything we sought to achieve for the good for future generations to benefit from.
Well, sir, this is my statement. If you disagree, please say, and if you agree, I'd be happy to hear this too. My view on this is that the way you treat wildlife so indiscriminately and so poorly is a reflection of the character and the moral fortitude of the people who are involved. And it's a sad statement of society when you exterminate wildlife like this, which is important for not just biodiversity, but the natural heritage of Botswana.
You're very right. And you know, when we are now in this time very concerned about the effects of climate change, a lot of it which has been man-made, and we are trying to save our planet, and we are trying to adopt green technologies in order to reduce the harmful emissions, is because this is where we live, and the entire fauna and flora that we have to interact with for our own purpose has to be protected. But you've got people there driven by corruption who just don't care about our planet, about the creatures that God put on this earth. And everything is being decimated. And they don't have a care in the world. And they're doing nothing about it. So, yes, you're quite right. We're in that situation.
Well, I think it's difficult for anybody to argue the success of Botswana's conservation efforts when you were in the BDF during President Mohai's presidency, during your term as president. It's clear that Botswana's elephant population soared. It was the safest elephant herd. In fact, many of us who pay attention to the events in Angola from the conflict there with UNITA and the MPLA, we know that there are a lot of landmines were sown by the Angolans, by UNITA, by the South African forces there in the southern part of Angola. In fact, the elephants are wise. They're pretty smart. The matriarchs know what is safe, where to go for the water holes, the distances, the routes. It was so dangerous because of landmines that elephants were coming from Angola and relocating on their own. They were without a passport. They were migrating into Botswana. That's how safe it was.
Well, you're quite right. In fact, I refer to some of the elephants that we have in our country as refugees because they did come from other countries. Yes, running away from conflict, and we ended up at the time I left office with about 1/3 of Africa's total population of elephants. Of course, it came with its own challenges with problem animal control. But the thing was that these animals have a way of sorting themselves out. And some of them were collared because they came from Angola and because of their memories. Some of the collared ones you could see were traveling back into Angola, to recover their historical grazing and water sites. But then you would see that next thing they'd be turning around and coming back. And it's precisely for the reason that you mentioned, that because of the landmines, not all the landmines had been successfully cleared. And these elephants were stepping on the landmines and getting blown up. And the herd will run back into Botswana as a safe haven. But yes, we were very proud of the fact that we were able to protect these elephants. But now you would find people like Dr. Michael Chase, a very, very experienced researcher on elephants. And he was drawing to the attention of the government the slaughter of our elephants to poachers. And because they didn't like the fact that he was revealing this issue, they took away his research permits up until today. And he's a citizen of the country. And they have been targeting him because of that, for speaking out the truth. That is the situation that we have now.
Well, and not to throw darts, but Botswana for a long time has been accused, even during your time as president, of being harsh on the press and being difficult. I don't know if maybe that's a part of what's going on here. We're seeing some restrictions on press freedom in Botswana now. And as you said, and this has also happened to other university researchers in the past who've had their research license or grants suspended. It seems to me to be a self-defeating effort here. Why would someone want to silence things? You would want transparency, I would suspect, yes?
Indeed. In fact, when you talk about the concept of democracy, that's what it's all about. So it's not just the freedom of the press, which is being, which is in sharp decline in the country. It's every single freedom you can think about. Whether it's the freedom of speech, whether it's the rule of law, whether it's human rights, it's all going south under this current regime. So it's just an unfortunate thing, which has, blanketed our country at this moment, where we have this disease of corruption, which is driving the agenda of the day.
Well, let's turn a little bit to that, sir, very quickly, if you don't mind. For years, and I think this is something Botswana could take a great deal of pride in. Now, corruption was never non-existent. Well, we have corruption everywhere, and we have it in America. Let's be honest, we know that. But pervasive corruption was not something that Botswana experienced, and certainly not, for the most part, high-level corruption for a long time. Transparency International, for year after year after year, rated Botswana the highest-rated country, and that's impressive because you're competing with countries like Mauritius, where things are mostly above the board there. But Botswana is falling now in Transparency International's ratings for corruption, and that's got to be an embarrassment for Botswana.
Well, the people engaged in it are not embarrassed at all.
Well, no, but I don't mean the people engaged in it. I mean the average Botswana.
Yeah, indeed. I was just going to make the point that they're the ones who perpetuate it. But yes, you're right. During my term in office, we always monitored those ratings very carefully, and I was proud that for each year that I was in office, we were rated the least corrupt country on the continent. And the steps that we had put in place to ensure that happened were obviously shown to work. But now you'll find that right from the top, and including the head of the intelligence service, they've all been acquiring properties, giving tenders to their cronies, putting money away. And there was even a docket on the head of the intelligence service, a chap called Peter Mahosi, remember that name, who was found corrupt. He was actually kicked out of the army for misappropriation of funds during his time in the army. So it's obviously in his DNA, to be greedy. He's driven by greed. And right now, in the 4 or 5 years that Masisi has been president, he's on his 4th head of the anti-corruption unit, on his 4th. And that is because every time he appoints one to try to do his bidding and to turn a blind eye to the corruption he and his regime are involved in, because they work with people of professionals, they then start saying, no, what we're seeing cannot be right. And then he fires the person. He fires the first one, he fired the second one, he fired the third one. He's now on his 4th because they won't do his bidding. And that's how bad it is.
That's really sad and unfortunate. In the interest of full disclosure for my audience, I'm very well acquainted with Brigadier Peter Mahosi. I know him very well. I know him personally. As far as what happened with the Army, that's something I'm not that familiar with. But I do know that during the time that he was head of the intelligence there inside the BDF, they were doing significant contributions to the anti-poaching at that time. That I'm very familiar with. But what came afterwards, that's thank you for sharing that. That's not something that I'm acquainted with. So it's interesting to hear that information. But the thing here is that to what end? I mean, why would it? Doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm not refuting what you're saying because I see it as well, and I've been reporting on it endlessly and breathlessly about what's happening in Botswana. But I don't understand how everything that's been going in such the right direction for such a long period of time can just be so easily unwound. And I suppose I should look at Washington and go, well, maybe I could see how it could happen. But I mean, it's for me, sir, it's baffling to see what's happening in Botswana with the corruption and the decline. People making excuses. Well, it's the pandemic. That's why the roads aren't repaired. And no, that's not acceptable. That's not Botswana. That's not the Botswana that I know. I'm very puzzled by it.
You know, we always thought we were immune, going down the path that other countries, not all, but some countries on the continent went down. And when you put self-interest before the people, when you think that when you become a president, you then become a monarch, this is the problem, where they just want to rule by decree, some of these politicians, and take the opportunity to enrich themselves whilst they're in office. And when you talk about what happened to our democracy, you have a good example over there. All it takes is one person to turn everything upside down, where you've had many years of where you have your institutions, your democratic institutions, doing things in a certain way, and the different administrations, Democrat or Republican, by and large, followed the path of democracy. And then one person came along, turned it on its head, and for a couple of years, you're still trying to recover from that now. And that's what's happened in Botswana with Masisi. He is somebody who has just allowed his hunger for power and for greed, driven by greed, to turn everything on its head and destroy many years, over 50 years of democracy that we had, myself and my predecessors and the people of Botswana had struggled so hard to entrench.
Absolutely, and that's the point. Botswana had recently celebrated its 50th anniversary of independence, and we thought things were going well, but it's not quite that way. Now, Nick Groves, one of my viewers, has a question for you. You kind of touched on this in our last conversation, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on it. Nick is a veteran of the South African forces, and he says, how did President Khama, he means when you were in the BDF, managed to mobilize and reskill the military to conserve rhino poaching? And you can talk specifically about that, but in general terms, we talked about this. Most of the skills that the military use for anti-poaching are simply military skills: discipline, reconnaissance, intelligence, patrolling, all those things. But sir, I'm sure there were some specific things you did to protect rhinos with the BDF and perhaps even elephants. You could talk a little bit about that.
Well, actually, what happened was he would know very well that 1994 coincided with the democratization of South Africa. And up until that time, we had been busy on our borders trying to secure them because there were the threats from the apartheid regime then. And that's when that rhino happened to be shot. And after it was shot and we discovered what had happened, I went to the president then, President Masire. And I said to him, not to be confused with Masisi today. His name was Masire. I went to him and I said to him, I was the head of the army at the time, that, one thing that I think is very important for the country is that we are always talking about diversification away from minerals. And tourism will obviously be another big engine of growth for our economy. And I think it's important. Our tourism is mostly wildlife based, if not only wildlife based. So no wildlife, no tourism. So let's make sure that we protect this resource and use the army to do so. And I said, anyway, during peacetime, it's not too healthy just having the army sitting in barracks, training, going on exercise and everything. We need to give them live situations as close as possible to what they would experience in a conflict situation when they would be having to defend their country. And what better way than having these soldiers out there in the bush, in the field, walking, day and night, with their equipment, with their weapons, being resupplied, all the activities that go around to the logistics backup and support that you would need as a military in the field. And that's what we did, because these poachers were like insurgents coming across the border, armed, into our country to wipe out our wildlife. So it was very easy to motivate the soldiers in that. And the whole thing was conducted as a military operation, as if we were dealing with real-time insurgents. But they're just poachers. But those poachers, I can tell you, were very skilled in their bushcraft, very skilled. And therefore, it was a real eye-opener for us. It developed their tracking skills. It developed their patrolling skills, their observation skills, day and night, whilst they were out there in the field. So it came with those benefits as a military, speaking as a military person, it had a lot of benefit. And then we went on to participate in some of the peacekeeping operations in Mozambique and Somalia. Our military was commended a lot by more developed nations and armies about their professionalism that had been achieved. And that was partly because of how we had exposed them and how we were using them in anti-poaching operations.
Absolutely. Well, and not just that, but people often forget Operation Boleas 1 and Boleas 2 in Lesotho, which was the BDF also participated in that, as did the newly formed SANDF. And to the BDF's credit, they were very professional. We can't say the same thing about the SANDF in those operations, but that was a long time ago, and they were struggling to merge all these forces from the Bantustans and from the Pan-African Congress and in Kontowisizwe and the old SADF. But yeah, the performance by the BDF there was also quite professional, and it's also held in high regard after all these years. Now, I wanted to ask you a question that I've always wanted to ask you, but you were president, and I was just there in a role as an attaché, and not try to take your time up when I was there. But this one's always puzzled me. I didn't know why it was done. I get it from a conservation standpoint, but then there's a counter argument that if you allow it, it actually enhances conservation. This is, you put in a ban on big game hunting when you were there. And of course, in South Africa, that's a big business where you have private ranches and people pay a fortune to come out. And some people make the argument that this actually enhances because a lot of that money goes back to preserving and expanding the amount of wildlife. But there was if I recall correctly, a complete ban on big game hunting in Botswana. Was that because of the dire nature of the situation, or in opposition to big game hunting in general, or can you tell us why that happened? Because I've always been curious about that.
Well, it wasn't just big game hunting. It was a ban on all hunting of wildlife species, yes. So what was happening? The hunters were, in a good number of cases, very unethical people, very unethical. You would find that some of our hunting areas were adjacent to national parks where animals are protected. These hunters would lure the animals from national parks into their concessions by putting in water points and feeding to draw the animals out of the parks.
I see.
So that was one thing that they would do. Second thing they would do is, because they're out there, you can imagine they're out there in the middle of nowhere in the bush. They have a quota for how many animals they can hunt. They would go along, maybe they have a buffalo on their quota. So they go along with their client and they see a buffalo, they shoot it. On the way back to camp, they see a better species of buffalo. And because these people want to impress and want their client to come back again, they will then say, no, you can go ahead and shoot that other buffalo, even though now they've exceeded their quota. They would then dump the one which is in the back of the vehicle and go off and shoot that one. So the hunters, the professional hunters, were also poachers. And this was leading to a decline in our wildlife. The other problem was this: while you're out in the field, you tell the soldiers, you must, like I've just described to you, you must go out and patrol in this environment. There are snakes around, there are lions, there are elephants, there are buffalo. You can lose your life, in that kind of environment. But you're required to do that in order to save a single animal, whether it's an elephant or an impala, a buffalo, what. You go out there and make sure no animal is shot. But just down the road, you have professional hunters legally shooting an animal. How do you motivate the soldiers to say to them, make sure no animal loses its life, but you're allowing animals to lose their lives legally through professional hunting? So it was a contradiction. So for that reason, we said, no, let's ban. We want to build up our stock, our species of animals. We want to create an environment whereby when people come and look at our animals, they will really appreciate them. And photographic safaris were far more beneficial for the country, for employment creation, for revenues, than hunting concessions. Because with a photographic, you employ a lot more people in a lodge throughout the year, whereas hunting was only for about 6 months of the year, very limited people, because you generally had one hunter, one client, whereas with photographic, you could have a camp full of 20 tourists, and you had to employ the staff, to look after them, taking them around, helping them to appreciate the environment. And the more you had photographic safaris, people going out on game drives, as they were going out on game drives, they were also occupying the territory and keeping poaching down, because they were driving their clients around all the time. And of course, if there are poachers around, they would be aware and they wouldn't want to be seen. And it also helped a lot in keeping the poaching down until we saw this onslaught with rhinos.
Well, that's a very detailed and clear explanation, which, a lot of people didn't seem to understand when you were in office. That's very helpful. Thank you for that. I presumed a lot of what you said, but I wasn't aware of that, so it's good to hear that. When you were in office, people were fond of making ludicrous claims. He's a military dictator. He just dictates to everybody what's going on. And from the outside, someone living in Botswana at the time, but from the outside looking at your government, that's not what I saw. I mean, if I'm wrong, then I'm happy to be corrected. But what I saw was leadership and people that I guess wanted endless consultation about things. But I mean, as a military man, you listen to your staff, they come to you with ideas, and then someone has to take a decision. That's what I got from it. Now, maybe I might sound like a fanboy here, but that's not my point. But I remember endlessly, we constantly heard that nonsense that you're a military dictator, and I didn't see that at all. By the way, we just got a super chat from Nicholas Groves. I'll get to that in a second. But have I missed something here? I mean, I've set this up, I guess, as a softball question. That wasn't my intent, but I still to this day, people inside the BDP and people outside the BDP are always saying that about your tenure as president, and I didn't see it. Maybe I'm blind.
Well, I can tell you something. People assumed that because I came from the military, I would be ruling with an iron fist.
Exactly.
And therefore, the word dictator suited the opposition to brand me with that name. I'm glad you say you didn't see it, because had it been like that, I wouldn't have, I don't want to sound big-headed or arrogant, but I don't think I would have received the reception that I did when I went out to meet people.
And the accolades. You got a lot of accolades from people, yeah.
The one thing about the military, even though it's the military and people have to follow orders, the one thing a leader was always taught was about man management and welfare of the troops. You can tell the troops, go and fight, go and do this. You can give them orders to do anything under the sun. But it's much better if they're in a situation where they want to do what they are told. And they know that you are also looking after their welfare and their interests. So when I was in the military, I had a lot of welfare programs for the benefit of the troops. And it just came naturally for me when I came into office to do the same for the nation. And I think, ask the people of Botswana what I tried to do for the disadvantaged in our society. And the amount of time I went out, more than any of my predecessors combined, to go out and meet people in public meetings to hear from them what their problems and complaints were, and if they felt the government was delivering to their needs. So the firmness that came from me was with the public officers, that you are there to deliver services to the people. You are there to deliver. And I would not be compromising when I saw that, services which should be given to people were not getting to them in the way they were supposed to be getting to them. So that's where one had to crack the whip to make sure that government services did reach the intended targets.
Well, this isn't. Thank you for that. And Nicholas Groves, what he said on that super chat, 700 Rand. Thank you for that, Nicholas. He said, please thank the ex-president. It's a hell of a breakdown. Genetic diversity is key to ecotourism. It is. Absolutely. That's what I was talking about earlier with bringing rhinos in from different places for genetic diversity. But this is unrelated to this, but I just want to get your thoughts on this if you don't mind, because I was just in Gaborone. And as you know, just before I met with you. And I look back, for me, my first experience is just about 25 years ago in Botswana, in Gaborone, actually having been there. You, of course, have an experience that goes back far longer than that. You probably remember a little dusty village of 5,000 people. But, the Western Bypass was a bypass. It's no longer a bypass. It's in the heart of the city now. And Mogaditsani is basically a bedroom community of Gaborone. Glen Valley's almost a bedroom community now. And then you've got Airport Junction, all that stuff out there. It is phenomenal, the growth of Gaborone over the past 40 years. I mean, it's if you were transported in time, not you or I, but someone who'd never been there, and they were taken to, they say, 1970 or 1980 in Gaborone, even 1980, and then they were taken today, you might have a hard time finding your way around. It's incredible, the growth of that city. Any thoughts about that?
Well, it's not only the city, it is the country at the whole. The road network, the electricity network, the water network, the hospitals, the schools, everything that was built over the last 40 years. And you know how that was achieved? It was achieved, unlike in some other countries, whereby the natural resources of the country were plowed back into its development of the nation in terms of infrastructure and developing the human resource in terms of education. And that's what we have been doing and building on our predecessors. I took the baton from my predecessor, who took from his, continuing in that, in what had been, a foundation which had been laid to build upon. But that now is all crumbled. You would not be able to say in the last 5 years that the same rate of development has been achieved. It's all now the potholes and the crumbling infrastructure and everything like that. Anything which would have been completed in the last 5 years was something which was started during my time.
Now, we were talking about the hunting ban there earlier. Thank you for that answer. We were talking about the hunting ban earlier. And did that also apply to the Basarwa, the San peoples? There are still some in the Central Kalahari, if I'm not mistaken. Were they also banned from hunting, or were they allowed to continue with their traditional things?
No, a ban meant a total ban.
It's a total ban.
Because
okay.
What happened initially, when this thing first started many years ago, they were allowed to hunt inside the game reserve because the government had very small revenues. We were one of the poorest countries in the world, and if people were able to survive on their own, that relieved the burden on the country. But now we had, I don't know about today, but we had a lot of welfare programs to help sustain people who were disadvantaged, who were poor. So they didn't need to go and do the hunting. But even there, the problem was that when they hunted initially, they used their traditional methods, the bow and arrow. And you cannot, with a bow and arrow, mow down herds and herds of animals.
No, you can't.
And these people had to go and find the animal, shoot it. The animal wouldn't drop immediately. It would run off, and they would have to follow it for a long time before catching up with it when the poison took effect. And then the animal would drop. They'd cut it up, have to carry it all the way back to their families. So the impact on wildlife numbers was negligible. But then people from the outside started using them, giving them weapons to go and hunt for them. So they were no longer hunting for their families, they were hunting for other people. And then you started to see a decline in the species in the Central Kalahari Game Reserve and other places like that. But we were giving them, if you talk about the source of meat and everything, during my time, we were giving disadvantaged communities like this, we were giving them livestock free, paid for by government, so that they could sustain themselves and rear their own and make a living out of it.
Now, there's another interesting phenomenon that happened, and I don't know if it predated or it just happened to be coincidental that it started around the time you became president, or maybe I'm just familiar with it because that's when I arrived, when you became president. And that was that along the southern border there, of course, we talked about this in our last conversation, there are colored communities who have relations and family ties on both sides of that border in Botswana and in South Africa, in the Northern Cape. There was this phenomena where there were poachers not killing livestock or animals, but they're going to the Trans-Kalahari National Park there, and they were snaring and capturing animals to ship to Asia to zoos illegally. And that was another aspect of poaching, which was having a big impact in the southern part of Botswana. Is that something that you were cognizant of and familiar with back in that time?
Yes, definitely. They were actually there was a lot of people on the South African side of the border, farmers on the South African side of the border, who were right on the border with our country, and they were arranging and organizing that crime of capturing animals and having them shipped across or onto their side. So yes, indeed, that was a phenomenon which was taking place.
Well, this is an odd comment, but one of my viewers in Arizona says he likes your vest. Okay.
He likes my vest.
He likes your vest.
Oh, you mean this?
Yeah,
Yes,
that jacket, yeah.
Yes, actually, it's got a. You can see the what you call it, the wild dog on there. Yes.
Yeah. That's the oddest comment of the day. But Charles van Onselen, who's in South Africa, says he'd like to know what's going on with elephants in Botswana today. Of course, we know that during your time, your predecessor's time, that herd built up to be over a third of the entire elephant population in all of Africa, particularly because of the decimation of elephant herds that took place in Kenya, but with poaching. But what's going on now? You mentioned there's poaching on. Are we seeing a lot of elephant being taken as well?
Yes, they are. And you know, this researcher I spoke to you about, Dr. Michael Chase, he's been the one trying to. I remember one time he came to see me when I was president and indicated some of the areas which could be of concern. And we redeployed our troops into those areas. But now when he's been trying to do that, he's not permitted to do so. So yes, indeed, there has been a lot of elephant poaching going on. And like I say, general poaching. I have people from the wildlife department today who would contact me or send a message to me to tell me how bad it is for them. They are totally demoralized. They are not supported, and they're not able to do their job effectively. So whether it's elephants or other species of wildlife, they're certainly taking a hammering.
Absolutely. Now, there's a comment here. I have a question, but there's a comment. Light Rainey's asking who buys the horn. The horn is being shipped to Southeast Asia and East Asia. I mean, that's where this stuff is going. Yes.
Yes, China, Vietnam have been in the forefront of the ivory and rhino horn trade. Yes.
Yeah.
And even though the Chinese made some sort of noises about stopping the ivory trade a couple of years ago, but it was just being brought into the neighboring states and shipped across into the border, because the corruption in that country is just over the top, and that's how they're able to get away with it. So yes, you have those syndicates which were very active.
Now, I'm trying to remember if I got this correctly, but is the Masisi government also approached CITES, the Convention of the International Trade in Endangered Species, to have the ban on horn lifted? Didn't they, in ivory? Wasn't that something they recently did, or am I mistaken?
No, on ivory they did. In fact, they even threatened to walk out of CITES at one stage. The current ambassador in Washington, our ambassador in Washington there, is somebody who used to be the minister responsible for wildlife. But again, under Masisi, because he wanted a job, he did whatever Masisi told him to do, and he threatened to take Botswana out of CITES because they didn't want the ivory to remain on Appendix 1, or a situation whereby there'd be no trade in those goods, because they said, we've got so many elephants, we've got such a big stockpile of ivory, we need to be able to sell it. And I said to them, when I was in office, I said, look at our elephant herd as part of Africa's. If we think we should be selfish and say, because Botswana has got so many elephants, we should then allow trade in elephant products. And that brings about increased poaching in other countries, who then would have their populations dwindle. That's very selfish. We should look at it from a continental perspective and participate in ensuring that whatever decisions are taken at forum like CITES, if it's going to benefit of these other countries, we must be willing to compromise our own situation and say, if it's for the benefit of the good, we collectively should go along with it and not be selfish. But these people, Masisi, one of his first meetings when he was in office, there were a few heads of state who he had invited for a meeting, And what did he give them? Elephant footstools. So, footstools, to give them to heads of state. I mean, what kind of message is that sending?
That's not.
So they just have no interest. This regime has no interest in wildlife.
No, that's not the message you want to send whatsoever.
No,
it's terrible. That's unbelievable. Now, listen, one of the things I like about our conversations, sir, we've just had a couple of them, is that we don't agree on everything, and that's good, because otherwise it's just a fan club, right? But let me just sarcastically say two things that I would have done differently, and maybe it might have an impact, just to get your reaction, okay? The first is that when the farm invasions took place in Zimbabwe in 2000, people were perplexed, and they said, why? And I said, well, it's because there's nothing left to plunder. They've robbed the industrial sector. They've robbed everything else. If you want to stop the farm invasions in Zimbabwe, then Washington just needs to send a C-130 with pallet loads of U.S. dollars to ZANU-PF twice a year, and they won't be invading the farms because they'll have all the money they want. That's the first cynical and sarcastic one. But with regard to the trade in horn and what's going with rhinos and elephants, and with rhinos in particular, I said, well, why don't we just hand out free Viagra all over Southeast and East Asia, and then maybe these people will get off this addiction for dead skin cells and use free Viagra for their erectile dysfunction or whatever it is. That's kind of cynical and sarcastic and a bit comedic, but I'd like your response to either one of those or both, if you don't mind.
Well, on the last one, it's just a myth that rhino horn has those qualities. But you know what it's like in society? There are people you would have heard would say that if you take a certain product, it can cure you of HIV/AIDS. And in some cases, they were even referring to go so far as to commit ritual murders in order to access those products or body parts in order to cure yourself of HIV/AIDS or to ensure you're not HIV/AIDS. There are some people who you will see on programs, documentaries, who will have things around their necks because that makes them invincible, it makes them bulletproof. If that is a belief, that is what you're up against in some of those communities. So yes, indeed, the ivory, of course, has nothing to do with it. The rhino horn, that is the problem. There's that belief, and that's why it has been able to have that kind of a market. On the farm invasions, that was done a lot as an election gimmick.
Yes.
Because ZANU-PF decline at that time under Mugabe in the population was going down, and he needed something because there's nothing he had killed the economy to the extent that there was not much he could offer his people. And so it was convenient to say, okay, land. Yes, we all agree that the majority of the land was in the hands of a minority. But everyone said there is a way in which you can address that situation by giving people access to land. But doing it in the way they conducted it, through farm invasions, was not the way to do it. The violence that took place. Yet there were other suggestions that were made how you could give more and more land over time. But as they're approaching the elections, it just became the thing to do, to say, walk in, take over a farm, and hopefully endear themselves to the population in that regard.
No, absolutely, and the devastation for all Zimbabweans is just it's a matter of history, a matter of record. It's really sad, but sir, it's I really appreciate you coming on in such short notice and willing to talk about it. But I understand, I know this is a topic you have a deep passion for as a conservationist, and you have grave concerns over what's happening to the wildlife and the biodiversity of Botswana. So it's a real pleasure to get you on and have you address this. Now, before we wrap up, one of the viewers here in the States said they use poison until it takes effect. Yes, the Basarwa, the San people, the Bushmen, they use the poison on their darts, which will cause the animals to drop eventually, and they can go and they can get them. But they're able to eat the meat. But that's how they do it. They've been doing it for thousands of years, and they've been very effective. I mean, these incredible trackers, they can follow these animals for kilometers. I mean, you and I would be gassed. We'd be sitting there asking for water or oxygen, and the Bushmen just keep chasing it. It's pretty incredible, their hunting skills and their tracking skills, isn't it, President Khama?
Yes, the San people, or the Basarwa as we call them, they really are so skilled in that ability of tracking. You know, they can tell you, you know, when an animal passed by, how long ago it was when it passed by, you know,
whether it was
even if
injured or it's sick.
yeah, exactly. I was just about to say that if it was injured and it was limping, they'd be able to pick all that, you know, and not only to do with tracking wildlife, even the right plants to eat, you know, how to get liquid out of certain plants in order to sustain themselves in a very, very arid thing. But like you said, you're correct. They used the poison on the tip of their arrows, on the arrowhead. It's not like others who will go and poison a water hole, and every animal that comes to that water hole is going to die because of that thing. So there'll be mass deaths because of that kind of thing. So yes, their method of using poison was definitely not unethical.
Yeah, no,
or detrimental.
No, not detrimental, because it was just that one creature. It didn't affect the whole, and it was, and they harvested that creature. They didn't just allow it to go. But the you know, you talk about this, you know, another thing we haven't really talked on, but it's happened in South Africa. And I think it may have happened in Botswana. I don't recall, but the poisoning of vultures by poisoning, putting poison meat out for vultures to come down. This is an atrocious practice which has endangered vultures in South Africa. And I say that because that's a conservation issue, but also I'm a huge rugby fan, and the Botswana national team is the Vultures, so it just came to mind.
The Botswana which team, sorry?
The rugby, the national rugby team is the Vultures,
yes,
yeah.
okay.
So that came to mind.
No, it's true. We've had the same incidents like that. And vultures are not plentiful by any stretch of the imagination. They're also endangered. And when you think the good that they do, that their contribution to nature is very, very vital. And to have them poisoned like that is extremely, as you just say, it's just unbelievable that people would go to that extent.
Absolutely. You know, they play a critical role in the ecosystem, just like ants do, and other creatures that clean up the rotting corpses and the rotting things that are in our environment that could poison our environment. These creatures clean them up and help keep the environment safe for everyone. And it's really, I think it's the height of lunacy to poison vultures who do such an incredible job helping the environment. It's beyond me. I don't get why people do that, but I mean, you know, people are just crap sometimes. Yeah.
Indeed.
So before we wrap up, sir, I don't know if you want to address this. You and I have talked about this in a previous conversation. One of my viewers says, what is President Khama's opinion of the current state of Botswana? I don't know if you want to weigh in on that. We've talked about it previously. I know that you have grave concerns. Did you want to address it before we wrap up?
Well, yes. I think the vast majority of people in the country are extremely concerned at how they have been neglected and abandoned by the leadership, and how the leadership has been self-serving. They are very concerned about like I said earlier, the rule of law, human rights, and are all in decline. Democracy generally is in decline, and this self-enrichment, this corruption, especially around the leadership, is really alarming. But the good news is that next year we've got elections, and the mood in the country, and judging from by-elections which have happened, they're on their way out. So we just have to stomach this for another year plus, whenever the elections will be called next year. And it's full our intention to make Botswana take its place along all the well-known and respected democracies in the international community.
Now, is there a term limit in Botswana? Could you or, say, President Moai come back and serve another term in the future, or are you limited to 2 terms?
Well, that's a very, very good question. There are some who say it's never been done before, that you can. Others who say, no, you can't. But we have term limits. At any one time, you cannot do more than 10 years. 2 terms of 5 years.
Which you've done, and which President Moai has done, yes. Okay.
Exactly, yes.
All right. Well, that is interesting. So 2 things before I let you go, sir. 2 things. The first is that Mike Chase, isn't he the gentleman with Elephants Without Borders? You were
That's
talking about
correct.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yes.
That's why I recognize the name. And then the last one here is that I didn't do this because I would just want to make sure we got a good interview. And you remember we had those noisy chaps in the other room when we were talking the other day. But one of my viewers has brought it up, so I thought I would be reticent not to mention it, or not. I would be negligent to not mention it. And that is your birthday was on the 27th of February. So he's wished you a belated happy birthday greeting.
Oh,
and yeah, and I do the same since the day afterwards I actually interviewed you. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
And the comments from people in Botswana who are watching, and those particularly in South Africa, have been very complimentary. People have really enjoyed the conversation, and they're grateful for hearing these straight answers from someone, as someone says, with a great deal of influence in Botswana, because getting news out of Botswana can be challenging at times. I thank you, sir. I'd like to stay and talk for hours, but I don't want to overstay my welcome because I'd like to get you back sometime. And I want to say kia loboa for your time and appreciate it, and wish you all the best. And we'll keep on top of this story. And anytime you want to chat, you have an open door here. Just have your PA let me know.
Thank you very much. I look forward to chatting to you again and to engaging with your listeners. Thank you very much.
Excellent, very much. I'll let you drop off, sir, and then I'll close up the broadcast, okay?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Folks, former President Ian Khama of Botswana. Let me get him off there, help him out there a little bit there. There you go. So he's off. There you go, folks. Ian Khama of Botswana. That was, from my perspective, pretty informative and epic. Thank you, Nick, for the 700 Rand. It's still sitting up there. That super chat stays a long time because the dollar or the amount. Marilyn says, thank you both. Great interview. Yeah, so what else we got here? I'm going to read some of the chat before we wrap up. Yeah, and then Crypto Noob says, what a legend. No, I agree. Look, I hope this didn't come across as a fanboy conversation, because it wasn't. I was just giving, a different perception. Like, for instance, what I mentioned, how people always accusing him of being a military dictator. That's not what I saw, but that's what the press breathlessly reported all the time in Botswana, and the opposition claimed, and even some people who were angry inside his own party because they were not influential. But anyway, so a chance for President Khama to set the record straight and to talk about this devastating situation of poaching in Botswana. It's really horrific and sad what's happened with the rhinos and what's happening with wildlife in Botswana. Now, as I said with President Khama, he and I don't agree on everything. I understand his logic now that he shared it, why they didn't allow any poaching. And really appreciate that. Vera Ryder just subscribed. Thank you for that. Why they didn't allow any hunting whatsoever. And it makes sense. But at the time, I didn't get it. And not that it mattered, but I was kind of opposed to it because I had also seen the benefits of big game hunting. But I understand why he did it. So I really appreciate that. This is why discourse is so important, folks. When you don't agree with someone, you talk it out. You hear what they have to say. You hear their point. And after hearing President Khama's position on why they had a total ban on hunting, I get it. I understand why they did it. And it made sense. And there you go. So, all right, folks, thanks a lot. I might do a night out tonight. I'll let you know. I've got to run some errands. But I have to check and see if I can still drive. It started snowing before I went on the air. So if the roads are clogged up, then I won't be driving. But anyway, so thank you all so much. We'll try to do night owls. Thanks for those who tuned in over on Rugby Ascendant to watch the the Cheetahs slaughter the Griquas in the first game of the Curry Cup. I do appreciate your support for the channel. And we're going to wrap it up right here. Be sure to leave a like behind if you've got a comment. Please do that as well. Appreciate it. And to everybody in Botswana, thank you for tuning in. To the folks in South Africa and USA, UK, around the world, thank you. I hope you found this an interesting conversation. I enjoyed it, and I hope you did as well. And this was the Indaba Conversation with Chris once again. And that's it, folks. Take care of yourselves. Don't take any wooden nickels. Don't listen to Joe Biden because he's just telling you nonsense. And if you happen to hear about Karine Jean-Pierre, yeah, chief propagandist. All right, folks, that's it. Thanks a lot. We'll catch you a little bit later. Cheers.